you know, the word artifact, I don't know if you'll notice, the word artifact and the word art have the same root. And the root is a word, it's originally a Greek word meaning skill. It's the skill of making things. That's literally what art means. So it's not just paintings and sculptures. Art is any skillfully made, human-made object. That was the original intention of the word. So if you take the design is sort of almost by definition an artful approach to making things. It is by definition a human thing. What happens in nature, you can call it what you result with designs, but the process of design of nature is natural evolution, right? You have genetic mutations, you have evolutionary forces, if you like, that allow some mutations to survive over others because of fitness to purpose and to fitness to the environment and conditions. And so nature evolves by a design process that we call natural evolution.
But
design, the way we're talking about it here, is artifactual. It's expressly and specifically about creating objects that humans make. So the stone tool that you see in the top left of the screen there was made by actually pre-humans. It was made by very, very early hominids. And it was the beginning of the development of a very sophisticated ability to make things in the world that we have, and we've been evolving for millions of years. I'll get to that part of the story. So it's a little bit of a semantic question, what you call design and what you call evolution. But just for the purposes that we're here, I like to call the artifacts, the objects of the human imagination and of human skill, design. Because we haven't, you know, the other way that we use the word design in the English language is we talk about something was done by design, right? Carter, do you know what by design means when we use it in that sense?
Yeah, I do.
So you want to share with us?
Oh, so having the foresight and the learned skill, as you were talking about, and that learned skill, is that something that's like gained, or because of course like a skill has to come from like being unskilled at some point.
Right. So by design, the first part is really close to the dictionary definition. It means with intention, right? It means I want something to happen in a certain way, and I'm going to design my way towards that. I'm going to try to figure out how to get there towards my intention. So there's something intentional. That's why I prefer to say that design needs an intention before it even needs a goal or an objective. And so design proceeds from that intentional sense. Like we just feel, oh, I really want that. I set an intention on getting it, and that becomes the design process. So I'll talk more about how we differentiate and we can distinguish between the act of designing things versus natural evolution. But I think you've really nailed the big issue that's at the center of this discussion. All right, so let's go on a bit. So I'm going to be telling you a 5-part story about the evolution of design consciousness, how we as a species have gone from making the kind of stone tools that you see in that image into making the one that you see sitting right above the stone tool, which is an iPhone, very possibly one of the most sophisticated pieces of design technology that has ever existed on the planet. It's an incredibly sophisticated device. And I don't mean just the iPhone. I mean the whole class of artifacts that we now, sort of live in the digital domain. So the 5-part story is going to go all the way back to that point, and it's going to look at, and all the way to the present in 5 steps. And it's going to look at not just the consciousness that we have evolving and unfolding, but the way we practice design, what the processes are that we bring to it, and what it does to innovation. This is a very important element of how we understand design and its evolution. So as I said, design starts here. It starts when we were an animal like many other animals. We were very similar. We emerged from an animal very much like a present day chimpanzee. Ardipithecus is in our ancestral line, and they were tool users, and they were our forebears that came down for the trees. And when they came down for the trees, they already had some tool using ability, but apparently it appears from the archaeological record that when their hands were freed up, they started using tools in a very different way. And they started being able to pick things up. Their hands were no longer engaged in holding on to keep themselves in the trees. And so they started evolving to be able to be better tool users. And as they became better tool users, because their hands evolved from being able to grasp onto trees, to being able to grasp the artifacts that they picked up, the sticks, the stones, the bones that they picked up. They learned to not just manipulate them as tools, but they learned to shape them to be better tools than they were in their absolute natural form. And if you like, that goes very much to the question if that was the beginning of artifactual innovation, right? It's not waiting for nature to evolve the stone into being sharper and better to cut, but a hominid, a human, took it and turned it into something more effective for its purpose. And so our hands evolved, our eyes evolved, our binocular vision became better and better. And along with the binocular vision getting better, we developed better eye-hand coordination. And what happens when you have better eye-hand coordination and you've got more effective and more fine dexterity with your fingers, you can make better tools. And by making better tools, you learn to make even better tools. And so we have this as a picture of how things evolved over the next 1.5 million years, where we started making the kinds of crude tools that you see in the bottom left, what I call an Aldebaran tool. I don't call it, people call it Aldebaran tools, where we were something like the fellow that you see walking along there with a bone in his hand, Homo habilis, who had a very small brain, about 600 cc, about the size of a chimpanzee, a modern day chimpanzee. And over time we evolved, we started using tools like the Acheulean tool that you see there, a very, very refined piece of stone, very finely carved with a technology that archaeologists call stone knapping, K-N-A-P-P-I-N-G. And they use that to shape stones, but obviously they were shaping wood as well. They were probably shaping skin. Those artifacts just didn't survive. But the nature of the artifacts got more sophisticated and refined and more effective at doing what they were supposed to do, which is protecting people from attackers, helping them hunt, and helping them actually harvest meat off of the bones of the animals that they initially scavenged and eventually hunted. And so their diets improved, their brains got bigger, and now the evolution wasn't so much in the mechanical aspects of the body, but on the cognitive aspects. The brain grew and we got smarter and smarter. And we got smarter by design. We were more effectively adapting to our environment, and we had a competitive advantage over all the other species that allowed us to improve our diet, and we rose up in the food chain, and we got a bigger and bigger brain. And so by about 500,000 years ago, we were the fellow, the second from the right, and he had a brain that was about almost as big as ours is today, and made tools that were more like the one that you see on the bottom right, which is characterized by not having a mechanical function. It wasn't used for striking anything or hitting anything. It was what again, anthropologists call a symbolic tool. It was a tool that was meant to communicate ideas and intentions rather than to actually act in the world in a direct way. And that's a huge breakthrough. That ability to do symbolic thinking and to make symbolic tools and to design symbolic tools is the part which makes us very, very separated. From that ability, we get probably our most sophisticated and most powerful tool, which is language, our ability to communicate using symbolic terms like words, right? And sentences and stories. And our ability to tell stories is in fact probably the most powerful tool that we've ever designed. And then all the way to the modern era, that sort of starting from about 200,000 years ago, we became what we are today, genetically, pretty much what we are now. We had all the physical and cognitive abilities to design the iPhone. What we lacked was a design process that could get us to that point and the sophistication of technology that allowed that, all right? That's a lot of information on that slide. Any questions or comments before I go to the next one?
What was the last thing that you said about the Homo sapiens?
The part where I said we evolved.
The only thing that was lacking was, like, you're saying the only thing that we had already had the ability to cognitively think about and create the iPhone, was your example, but we weren't unable to do that then because we just lacked the previous
technology.
design.
We lacked the, you could say we lacked the behavioral sophistication that we have today. It's taken us about 250,000 years of social and psychological and behavioral evolution to get to the point we are today. And so a lot of this story is about evolving design behaviors, the process and the methods and the understanding and the technology that all get wrapped up around them. Technology obviously is a really big one, and that's why innovation is such an important part of this story, right?
Thank you.
Okay. And so once we had that, around about 100,000 years ago, we had at that point pretty much evolved in Africa. We are an African originating species. And with that ability, that if you like, to creatively adapt to our environment, right? Remember, that was one of the definitions that I suggested. It's creative adaptation. We could adapt to any environment. We can go live in the coldest climates, or we could live in the hottest climates, the driest, or the wettest. We could live on the water. We couldn't, we now can live in the water. We can live in outer space. Those are all amazing examples of creative adaptation. And so once we had that ability, we started spreading out around the globe. We went to every part of the world, first to Asia, then to Europe, eventually all the way to Australasia. And the very last part is we got to the very far eastern side of Asia and crossed the land bridge into North America. And the very last place in that grand journey was to South America, the very tip of South America. And that was a journey that took us about 60, 70,000 years. And we obviously in that time developed many, many amazing cultures that we know of all around the world that have all manifested in very different and unique artifacts, different from each other, all coming from that same common understanding of how to make things, and ability to make things from our imagination into reality. So the consciousness that we had through all of that, I would describe as we had no articulated awareness. We weren't aware that we were designing or making things. We were just making them. It was instinctual. The practice was instinctive behaviors. We didn't stop and say, well, I wonder how we could make that better. We just made it as well as we possibly could. The process was materially determined. So if we're making a stone tool, what we could do with a stone tool determined the shape that we put it in and determined its design. And innovation, that ability to invent new designs constantly, was extremely limited. You know, from the Aldebaran tool to the Acheulean tool was 1.5 million years. That was a one design that took 1.5 million years to go obsolete. The Acheulean tool to the symbolic tools was about 1 million years. That's an amazing, you can imagine Apple putting out an iPhone and saying our next one's coming out in 1,000,000 years time, right? So clearly we've accelerated the pace of innovation dramatically. And so what characterizes this first part of our story is an extremely slow pace of innovation. And we made beautiful things. That's when we started making symbolic artifacts like paintings in caves, like little sculptures that represented the social norms that we needed. These weren't decorative, these were highly functional artifacts. They were meant to communicate, they were meant to keep stability within society, they were meant to organize people in relationship to each other so they could understand who they were themselves and how to relate to people who weren't in their tribe and in their hunting group. Okay.
Yeah, should we take a little break?
Yes, let me just read this and then we'll go to, because that's a nice segue into the next thing. Design arises from our ability to adapt by our own creativity. So that's what we've been talking about. Let's take a stretch and we'll come back and talk about chapter 2.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you got my message via the chat.
No.
Yeah, I actually did the survey before our first class, so I didn't know that we were supposed to add our location. And it wasn't allowing me to go back, so I just want to let you know that I'm in San Francisco, so you can take note of it.
Okay, thank you. I also got an email from a couple of people, and yeah, so if you want to sort of send me some of the information, it's very helpful for me to know where you are and everything, especially when I'm forming the team. So I don't know how to change the quiz, so you can go back in and change it. Obviously, this is not a quiz for grades, so.
Yeah, no worries. Like, I can send you an actual email if you'd like, just so you have a record of it. And I think also you asked us to kind of state like what experience or classes we've had with design as well, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
that's very helpful.
An email. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Also, I wanted to confirm which of the books that you were saying were required for the class. I think you said that 2 of them were required and the other 2 were optional, or?
Well, yes, 2 are absolutely required, and the other one of them is. Let me see if I can dig them out. Where have I got them? All right, so this one is an absolute must-have essential. This is the one that's the Universal Principles of Design. Okay. This one, its companion is the little handbook, the Universal Principles of Design pocketbook.
And that one's required.
Again, if you've got this is just really a nice thing to have, but you don't really need it. You do need to get the Universal Methods of Design.
Okay.
There is no larger version. Well, actually, there is a larger version, but I think it's out of print and you can buy it for about $1,000. So I didn't want to do that to you all.
Yeah, but the little one's okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this one is also required.
Okay. So those 3.
Yep, the 3.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. All right, so we're back. Let's dive back into this discussion, this story. I don't know if you can tell, but this story excites me as a designer, as a lifelong designer, and just knowing where this all started and how we got there it's been absolutely riveting for me. So I hope I'm making it the same way for you as well. So the next chapter of the story is what I call artisanal design. It's the time when we started settling down, what we call sometimes becoming civilized. You know, the word civilized comes from the same root as the word city, is when we started settling into place and stopped wandering around quite so much on this long journey around the world and hunting and gathering as we had done in our evolutionary stages. The characteristic of artisanal design is that the makers are the designers, right? People are just making stuff. They're not thinking of design as something else. They are a person who makes stuff. And in fact, earlier artisanal culture was highly unarticulated. There were makers in a culture that made most of the artifacts, and slowly over time, as cultures evolved and became more sophisticated, there was more and more of a specialization. So the basket weavers were different than the cloth weavers. The hunters were different than the people who prepared food. And so slowly there was artisanal specialization that happened as societies settled down and became more sophisticated. Oops, why is this not happening? Well, obviously what that meant was that tools were being designed at a more accelerating rate. And there was generational continuity. What you handed along your artisanal specialization from one generation to the other by some process of handing things off and handing things down. And that's a really important thing. That happened for thousands of years. You could say the artisanal period of manufacture, of artisanal industry, was about 12,000 years. There are still artisanal cultures around today, very few and very marginal. But so we're, in a sense, still living with artisanal culture. And obviously within our own industrial culture, there are elements of artisanal industry. We won't get too far into that right now. The belief system, if you like, in artisanal culture was about gods. I mean, if you like, that first image that I showed, the Michelangelo image, is maybe one of the most sophisticated versions of this same idea that when we create, we have to make peace with the gods in order to have our inspiration, have our skill. These are all, if you like, God-given gifts. And so every culture, every artisanal culture has its own creation stories that generally involve some kind of external God who makes things and who inspires us to make things, and who we have to be highly cautious about contradicting or offending. So the Greeks had Hephaestus, who was the Greek god of fire and the forge. He was the god that, by Greek mythology, gave them the technology, fire, to make things out of metal. And that was their belief system. So that was another example of that. And artisanal industries evolved around organized systems. In Europe, they were called guilds, and all artisans had to be a member of a specific guild in order to ply the trade. And it was the guild that set the standards by which they worked, that allowed them to do certain things, that reserved trade for them, that allowed certain people to be artisans, and that set the terms for what it took to hand their skills and their knowledge from one generation to the other. They called it, in Europe, it was called apprenticeship. An apprentice had to work for a master craftsman for 7 years and learn not just the physical aspects of making things, but the cognitive aspects. They had to learn what patterns they could make with whatever their artisanal craft was. If it was fabric, making fabric, they had to learn how to design fabrics in their particular models and methods. And if they were shoemakers, they were shoemakers. If they were smiths, metalsmiths, they learned the patterns and products of metalsmithing, and they passed it from generation to generation through the process of apprenticeship. And so the consciousness of the artisanal period, this artisanal industry, is what I call culturally encoded. It was embedded into the institutions of society that told you what you could and couldn't make, that told you how far you could deviate from the norm. Their practice was artisanally specialized, and the process they went through was ethically determined or spiritually determined, religiously determined. There was a sense of you did things a certain way because that's the way that you were supposed to do it. You were constrained from doing things too out of the ordinary. And so the innovation element of it is that innovation was relatively slow. It was accelerating, but it was very incremental. Every now and then there would be a little bit of a technological breakthrough and a technological innovation that would open up the way to new kinds of crafts. But mostly it went, over a 12,000 year period. Certainly it wasn't rapid. There was no big jolts of technology on innovation. But to me, the most key takeaway from the artisanal period is this quote from an anthropologist and a sociologist by the name of Richard Sennett in a wonderful book called The Craftsman, where he defines craftsmanship as an enduring basic human impulse, the desire to do a job well for its own sake. And that to me sort of sums up what that ethic was that drove artisanal design culture. So that there was always this desire to make everything well, whether you're making a crown for a king or you're making a shoe for a horse. It was the artisanal, craft-driven desire to make it well. And by making it well, you had to design it well. So there was sort of one and the same thing. Any questions there about the artisanal period? Comments, thoughts? Okay.
I did actually have something I was trying to unmute. But like you were talking about like artisanal design and more so like the artifacts that sort of made these artisanal designers to come into existence. They of course needed to like be provided for and have the infrastructure to like be able to use their time designing stuff and having these really specialized skills we talked about. Just like for example, like how long did it take for us to get from like those tools to be able to get the agriculture to be able to like sustain artisans designing this stuff? Right
now, it happened at different rates in different societies, and it happened in different ways all around. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of cultures that we could pick out.
But you understand what I'm asking, right?
Not exactly. If beyond that.
Okay. I'll just leave it there then. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Incidentally, I'm going to be sticking around after the class for at least 10 minutes or so. If anybody wants to talk to me then and engage with me, that'll be fine time for that.